Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery is up there with Batman's in terms of popularity and quantity of villains. And a giant reason Raimi was such an exceptional pick to bring the Wallcrawler to life in the early 2000s was the fact that a majority of Spidey's foes have horror roots baked into them. From Man-Wolf, Morbius, Green Goblin, Jackal, and many more. Some that will even be talked about soon. Of course, Raimi used his background in horror to bring what I believe is a staple to what makes a Spider-Man story elevated and memorable. And in honor of Spidey's creepiest baddies, I thought why not talk about 5 of his scariest and lesser known villains. That'll give Green Goblin or the Lizard nightmares. Starting with number 5, Vermin. Vermin is a very interesting case because he actually started out as a Captain America villain, then became mostly a Spidey foe. He was a brilliant scientist who was abducted and experimented on by Baron Zemo, turning him into a humanoid cannibalistic rat. He would stalk the sewers of New York, dragging people down into the gutters and feasting upon their flesh. He's on some real Pennywise shit, and his backstory is actually quite heartbreaking. Being a scientific mind that wants nothing but to help the world, getting all of that stripped away and being turned into nothing but a horrific being. What makes his character more tragic to me is the fact that he is so vilely grotesque to look at, that people tend to see the worst aspects about themselves and the world around them when they see him, making them kind of go into a rage wanting to beat the living snot out of the poor guy, who isn't even in control of his action. He's being a simple-minded animal. Now, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure if that's a psychological effect from his appearance or if it's some kind of power, because I'm almost certain that they hint in later issues that he gives off some kind of pheromones that make people feel a certain way around him, but it's never exactly clear. But he at least gets some kind of happy ending because after many run-ins with Spidey, he ends up in Ravencroft, and he is taken under special care with a therapist named Kafka, who helps him control the beast inside of him and bring the human back out. Then after one big standoff with Zemo, with of course the help of Spider-Man and Kafka respectively, he was able to cure himself and even use his talents to get a job at Ravencroft to help the inmates there find peace the way Kafka helped him find peace. Until the time they rebooted and now he's a monster rat guy again. Hashtag justice for Vermin. Number 4, Carrion. Carrion has a bit of a complex backstory, but I do think it's quite a good one nonetheless. Basically, he is a clone of the Jackal, someone who could have made this list if it was a top 10 instead of 5. But what can I say, 5 is easier to make. But he's not exactly a normal clone. See, the Jackal was Miles Warren, a professor at good old ESU, the college Peter attends. In fact, he was Peter's biology professor. He simply put is a mad scientist that turned himself into a monstrous being called the Jackal, like pretty much all of Spidey's rogues. I swear, 90% of Batman's villains are insane serial killers, and Spidey's are crazed scientists that turn themselves into something else. Anyways, Professor Warren fell in love with Gwen Stacy and grew jealous of Peter because he was her boyfriend. We're already off to a gross ass start, I know. He stalks Peter until one day he finds him changing into Spider-Man. After Gwen died, he made a clone of her and Peter to get revenge over Gwen's death, blaming Peter for her death. Peter defeats him and Warren ends up dying after his lab explodes in a fight. But he created a secret virus that when it affects a host, it transfers his memories into the body, taking over and essentially killing the person and becoming a new Jackal. But he looks like a rotting corpse. His appearance is sickening and 100% belongs in a horror film. And what's really crazy is his powers. He has a lot. His most notable one is being able to make his body transparent so objects can go through him like bullets or maybe a few wild swings from Spidey. But his most dangerous ability is that he can make any organic material deteriorate and turn into ash. He can also burn up his body so hot that enemies can't touch him because it causes burning. He is also the subconscious mind of a scientist, so he uses that ability to create what he calls the red dust of death, something he keeps in a cute little satchel. It's pretty useless if you ask me because it deteriorates a person when thrown at them, which, you know, is already a power he has. But he can be defeated, which is exactly what happened the first time around when Spidey used a creepy science experiment of Carry-Ons to help him take him out. But later on, one of Peter's ESU rivals, Malcolm McBride, finds another vial of the Warren's virus, accidentally exposing himself to it and then becoming another Carry-On until Spidey takes him to Reed Richards to help cure him. Number 3. Kindred. Okay, remember how I said that the complex origin of Carry-On actually works for me? Yeah, this one's gonna be the complete opposite. Kindred's actually a pretty awesome character. On paper. In execution, but he's still scary as shit and deserves to be on this list. Also, the character has a great potential if ever brought into live action or even other media like games or animation, if the backstory is changed heavily. So to save you all the complexity and nausea of who Kindred is and the origin behind him, I'm simply gonna skip it because honestly, the mystery of who he is, it's pretty ass, and it's the least interesting thing about him. So instead, we're gonna focus on his powers and more so that disturbing design. Of course, he has super strength, but he can also teleport, self-heal, project psychological illusions, he can enslave souls / mind control, and his biggest one, he can resurrect the dead. Oh, and he can control centipedes, because for some reason, he has centipede tentacles. But when it comes to resurrection, he will kill his enemies over and over again by resurrecting them and then finding a new way to murder them, torturing the person for as long as he wishes. His design of a semi-looking mummy really plays into that idea of him manipulating the dead, mainly because he's a demon of sorts. He's also just a really messed up guy. He dug up the bodies of Captain Stacy, Gwen Stacy, and even Uncle Ben and tried to force Peter to have a nice little dinner with them. Then when Petey Boy refused, he forced him to relive his worst guilt and then killed him by snapping his neck, only to revive him and then kill him over and over again. See, I told you he wasn't a nice fellow. Even though I'm not exactly a fan of the Kindred story arc, and there's a lot about the character's backstory I utterly hate, I think if ever adapted and executed in a more straightforward way than the comics, he could easily end up being one of Spidey's most memorable and beloved villains. Number 2. The Thousand. If spiders are your worst fear, first off, why are you watching this video? And second off, I got the villain just for you. The Thousand is an extremely obscure Spidey foe that I'm like 99% sure only shows up in a single 3-issue arc. But it's exceptional. It's written by Garth Ennis, who created The Boys. And to be honest, I'm not much of a Garth Ennis guy. I love The Boys show, but the comic is horrible. And I've read some of his other work throughout the years, and he's just too cynical of a writer. I mean, it feels like he hates comics themselves at times. Anyways, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this story, as disturbing as it is actually really sweet and heartfelt. 2 words I never would have thought to describe about a story coming from the guy that invented Herogasm, with the narrative being about this bully from Peter's youth coming back to haunt him. Carl King was a sadistic bully that would torture Peter every day until one day, he wasn't around anymore. When Peter went to the famous science field trip where he got bit by the also famous radioactive spider, Carl noticed. He followed Peter around because he thought it would be funny to watch him suffer from what he presumed to be a venomous spider, wanting to simply get a kick out of Peter getting sick. But he was dumbfounded when he saw him using his new powers, deciding to break into the science lab and get bit by the spider too. But by the time he found it, the poor dude was dead. But that didn't seem to be a problem, because Carl thought that whatever was in the spider that gave Peter his powers should still be there. He's just gonna have to find a way to get it inside of him too. So he opened his mouth wide and ate the spider whole, which led to his insides melting and becoming a hive mind of 1,000 spiders. And when his mom came home one night, he shed his Carl King skin, and out from his mouth came the army of creepy crawlers, who then entered his mother's mouth and ate her alive from the inside, now wearing her skin. Then it's alluded that Carl used his mother's skin to seduce his dad, and then he too got eaten alive and used as a costume. Yeah, a whole lot of nasty stuff to unpack there. But yeah, his powers basically consist of eating his prey and then using their skin as a disguise, while mimicking their voice somehow. It's as straightforward and foul as that. Now that I'm done explaining who the Thousand is, you might be asking yourself, how is this story even considered heartfelt? Well, Ennis uses Carl's psychopathic need to hurt people to tell a touching story about how because May taught Peter empathy and kindness, he grew up to be someone who used his powers in a positive way. Whereas someone like Carl only hurt people over and over again. I don't want to spoil anything else because it's truly a great little tale, and I think it's worth your time to check out. Alright, number 1 is going to be Demogoblin. He's a possessed version of the Hobgoblin, and if that dude wasn't crazy enough already, oh boy. Now the Hobgoblin pre-demon mode was already a complicated character, having at least 7 people taking on the mantle. So let's once again streamline it. All you need to know is that this version of the Hobgoblin was the third, Jason Macendale, who during a demonic siege upon New York from the evil entity known as Nasharith. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce. I'm throwing it on the screen. You can read it. I'm not gonna try to pronounce that. Macendale offers his soul to gain powers, and of course, you should never make a deal with a demon because all he did was get possessed. But hey, the powers did come with it. You know, after the price of free will. Macendale was no longer in control of his body or mind whatsoever. It was only the demon. Man, I mean, just look at this guy. Come on, that's some terrifying shit. Do I even need to explain why he's number 1? I mean, seriously, take a hard, long look. Out of every weirdo I mentioned so far, he has to be the one you really don't want to see at the foot of your bed in the middle of the night. Alright, I'll still read you out his powers and what his big evil plans are. Well, first, he's religious as hell. Yeah, you heard me right. A demon is mega religious. And not for Satan. He wants to rid the world of sin, making him somewhat of an anti-hero as he goes around trying to kill supervillains, as he believes he's ridding the world of evil. But like, I don't think he remembers his origin or even bothered to look at himself in the mirror. His powers consist mostly of matter creation. Basically, he can make anything he wants using his demonic powers, like the glider he uses to fly around. But more importantly, he conjures weapons such as pumpkin bombs, fire breath, various blades, and basically anything he can think of. That full demon Green Lantern. Beyond that, he can't die. He can be shot, stabbed, and even blown up, and can just walk away without a single scratch, making him one of Spider-Man's deadliest and freakiest foes. I mean, seriously, what'd that tongue do? With his last power being to sense sin from his targeted prey. Overall, he is a deadly and scary antagonist to Peter, and I wish can make a comeback into any form of Spider-Man media. So that's it. That's the definitive list of Spidey's most unnerving and sinister villains to ever creep their way into the pages of a comic book. And that's not just an opinion, it's a fact. But let me know, what's your list for Spidey's creepiest baddies? And I genuinely want to know how many of them from this list you already knew. But with that said, I'm done. I had to read way too much stuff for this video, and I need to take a nap. So, see ya.